On November 30th, 1924, Shirley Anita St. Hill was born to immigrant workers Charles and Ruby St. Hill. She was the first of 4 children. However, due to the workload of her parents, the 4 were sent to live with their grandmother, Emmeline Seal, in Barbados until Shirley was 10, when she moved back to New York. There, she began to take notice of her father's and her community's political activism. She would attend girls' high school in Bed-Stuy and did really well academically, to the point where she was offered a scholarship to Vassar College and Oberlin College, but since her family could not afford it, she went to the cheaper and more local Brooklyn College, where she began to get involved in political activism in her own right, via her membership of the Harriet Tubman Society, activating for inclusion in the U.S. military. She would graduate in 1946 with a major in sociology and a minor in Spanish, using her degrees to begin teaching at Mount Calvary Child Care Center in Harlem, while still attending classes at night, earning a Master's of Arts in Childhood Education. The same year Shirley graduated, a Jamaican man by the name of Conrad O. Chisholm would immigrate to New York, and he would meet Shirley. The two would end up getting married in 1949, with the two attempting to start a family. But after 2 failed attempts to have children, they would decide to focus on their careers instead. Shirley focusing on pushing for early education and child welfare issues, working with various facilities in this area. She would begin her first forte into electoral politics through working with Wesley Holder to elect Louis Flagg Jr. as the first black judge in Brooklyn, the two transitioning Flagg's campaign committee into a political organization to push for further civil rights, particularly through housing, called the Bedford-Stuyvesant Political League. She would end up leaving the group in 1958 after disagreements over the role of women in the organization. She would move on to work for many political organizations, from the Brooklyn Democratic Clubs to the League of Women Voters, before she settled on the Unity Democratic Club, led by an old friend of hers named Thomas R. Jones, whom Shirley would help win a seat in the state assembly in 1962. However, after he decided to not run for re-election in 1964, Shirley would make the decision to run for the seat herself. However, the UDC was hesitant to back her because she was a woman, but that did not deter her, and she continued to run regardless. And she didn't need their help anyways, because she would win the primary and the general by wide margins. And she immediately started pushing for her constituents, pushing against the state literacy test, getting unemployment benefits extended to domestic workers, and pushing for a program called the Search for Education, Alleviation, and Knowledge, which would allow disadvantaged students to get remedial education while attending college. In 1968, the New York congressional districts were redrawn, and the 12th district was drawn to be heavily focused on Bed-Stuy, which would make the incumbent decide to run in a neighboring district, and almost immediately, Shirley announced her intention to run for the seat in his place, running under the slogan, "Unbought and Unbossed." She ran an on-the-ground candidacy, usually through a sound truck, and despite her sex, she managed to not only win the primary, but also the general election to boot. After entering the U.S. House, Speaker John W. McCormack gave her a seat on the House Agricultural Committee, which Shirley felt was a very odd choice given her coming from an incredibly urban district, even confiding with an ally of hers, Rebbe Menachem M. Schneerson, that she felt insulted by her role, but he told her that she could use this position to help deliver surplus food to the less advantaged, eventually meeting with Bob Dole to help expand the food stamps program. This effort culminating in the creation of the Special Supplemental Nutrition Program for Women, Infants, and Children. In the subsequent session, after changes in the speakership, Shirley decided to support the House Majority bid of Hale Boggs over John Conyers. Afterwards, she was rewarded a seat on the Education and Labor Committee, the committee position that she wanted initially. In this term, she helped create 2 political organizations, the Congressional Black Caucus for advocacy inside the House, and the National Women's Political Caucus for advocacy outside the House. Her partner in the latter, Bella Abzug, helped Shirley push for a bill that would push for $10 billion for child care services by 1975. However, a watered-down version was pushed by leading Democrats instead, which was ultimately vetoed by Nixon regardless. While Shirley was putting all this work into Congress, she was quietly mulling her most ambitious plan yet. In July of 1971, Shirley had begun exploring the idea of seeking the Democratic nomination in the upcoming presidential election, making the decision to enter on January 25th, 1972, not only making her the first African American woman to run for president, but also the first African American to actively seek the presidential nomination of a major party. Despite her candidacy very obviously appearing to seek the support of the so-called fringe, Shirley wanted to go beyond her base, stating,
"I am not the candidate of Black America, although I am black and proud. I am not the candidate of the women's movement of this country, although I am a woman and I'm equally proud of that. I am not the candidate of any political bosses or fat cats or special interests. I stand here now without endorsements from many big-name politicians or celebrities or any other kind of prop. I do not intend to offer to you the tired and glib cliches which for too long have been an accepted part of our political life. I am the candidate of the people of America."
Shirley was of course looked upon as an unserious candidate due to her race and sex, not only among the general electorate, but also among people that you would think would be on her side, like many of the male members of the Congressional Black Caucus. She wasn't even given Secret Service security despite the various threats levied against her, having her husband serving as security during a majority of the campaign. 1972 was a strange transition period in the presidential primary process, as this was both the last time that people didn't take the primary seriously, but also the first time that people were taking the primary seriously, thanks to the drama that was levied towards the presidential primary process in 1968 and the ensuing McGovern-Fraser Committee. So, more candidates actively campaigned in primary states. Of the states that were going to hold primaries, Shirley only made an effort in two: Florida and New Jersey. Jersey because of its proximity to New York, and Florida because of its
Blacks, youth, and a strong woman's movement.
However, both of these endeavors would not be too important, as she ended up with a distant 7th, and New Jersey's primary was a non-binding measure. Two states' primaries that she did well in without needing to actively run was North Carolina, only being beaten by the state's governor and the guy that was going to win the South regardless, and California, which was mostly due to the role that the Black Panther Party played in helping push for her bid. One very interesting thing that happened during the campaign was when noted segregationist and her opponent, George Wallace, was shot and paralyzed. The most interesting thing was that Shirley Chisholm was the first politician to visit him in the hospital. A very shocking development, to say the least, but Shirley felt that it was the right thing to do, despite pushback from her base, stating,
"I know what they're going to say, but I wouldn't want what happened to you to happen to anyone."
It was only after the assassination attempt that Shirley was finally given Secret Service protection. On June 4th, Shirley became the first female presidential candidate to be invited to a primary debate, alongside McGovern, Humphrey, and Yorty. By the end of the primaries, she managed to get 430,703 votes. The convention was a little bit different story, as supposedly uncommitted delegates from the southern states, Louisiana and Mississippi, that were thought to favor McGovern decided to cast their votes instead for Shirley Chisholm. The former doing it simply because they wanted her voice to be heard, the latter because McGovern did not commit to ending the war in Vietnam in an appeal to moderates. Shirley leaving the convention with 152 delegates, shooting her up to 4th place. Fun fact, Shirley Chisholm had a German filmmaker named Peter Lienthal film her throughout the entirety of the campaign and release a documentary that same year. After her presidential bid, she had returned to Congress, ending up becoming the Secretary of the Democratic Caucus, where she continued to push for progressive causes. Her first goal was to try and pass the Equal Rights Amendment in Congress, ultimately succeeding in that endeavor by October, with presumably a very easy ratification process to follow. Other issues that Shirley would end up advocating for would be ending the Vietnam War, raising spending on social programs, repealing the concentration camp law, look it up, it's a real thing, helping Haitian refugees, and a bill to get domestic workers the rights to a minimum wage. That last one, she actually had some help in passing, with George Wallace actively campaigning to Southern Democrats to vote for her bill. A massive change for Shirley would come in 1977, when she announced that she would divorce Conrad and would end up marrying a former Buffalo, New York Assemblyman, Arthur Hardwick Jr., and after getting together with him, she would end up spending a lot of her time in Buffalo, which made her constituents back in Bedside a little mad, feeling that she was intentionally ignoring them. Her base would also grow weary, as she was considered too buddy-buddy with the Democratic establishment and opposed progressives, citing these 4 prominent battles. When a progressive primary challenger named Allard K. Lowenstein was running against a conservative Democrat named John J. Rooney, she would end up backing Rooney. When Elizabeth Holtzman ran a primary bid against Emanuel Seller, she refused to back Holtzman. When her own friend, Bella Abzug, announced a bid for Senate in New York, Shirley would refuse to back her as well. And lastly, would be being neutral in the New York City mayoral race, which had 2 candidates that she aligned with, and only made an endorsement in the runoff when both of these candidates were gone, with many progressive pundits beginning to publish articles criticizing her decisions, to which Shirley would actually respond, claiming the decisions she made were the best to represent her constituents, given the situations of the races. But that response remained unbought. In 1979, her husband would get in a car accident. While he was alive, he was very injured. Both of these factors, alongside growing weariness of politics due to the Reagan Revolution, with a slight hint of worrying that she might get primaried, compelled Shirley Chisholm to announce that she would not run for re-election in 1982, intending to return to private life as an educator in New York. However, there was one big problem. Many of the people in these positions were people that did not align with Shirley Chisholm's record, so she could only get jobs in out-of-state schools like Mount Holyoke College in Massachusetts and Spelman College in Atlanta. But she never really went away from politics, forming the National Black Women's Caucus with C. Dolores Tucker in 1984. However, due to the organization sharing a very similar name with an organization that Tucker founded previously, they changed the name to the National Congress of Black Women. That same year, Chisholm would help launch the presidential bid of Reverend Jesse Jackson and would support him again in 1988. However, in 1986, Arthur Hardwick would sadly pass away, and Shirley would begin distancing herself from activism to focus on her own well-being, which, as an older person, was starting to decline, even turning down being the ambassador of Jamaica during the Clinton administration due to this. Eventually, her health would catch up to her, and Shirley would pass away on January 1st of 2005. Many people know of Shirley Chisholm through her presidential bid, but probably don't know much about her record outside of it. Hopefully this video gives you some understanding of the situation that Shirley was in. Thanks for watching this video. Be sure to click that like button, share and subscribe, and click that bell to notify when a future video of mine comes out. And if you see more content from me, you can go to my website, follow me on Twitter, join my Discord, or consider supporting my Patreon.